Thank you. So, yeah, I'm Nick Sullivan. I work at a company called CloudFlare, which protects websites and protects web services from denial of service attacks, and it also helps accelerate websites. So it's kind of the future of content delivery networks. But I'm not going to talk about that in this talk. I'm going to go over some of the trade-offs that you have when you use cryptography, and the ways that cryptography can be used to secure businesses, and the pros and cons. So in security and IT security, everyone's looking for a silver bullet, something that you can use to just take your problems and make them go away. And oftentimes people think of cryptography as potentially, this is your silver bullet. This is what can fix a bunch of problems for you. And cryptography is an amazing technology. It's something that's been used since antiquity. It's been used to protect messages, and ever since the 1970s, it's also been given a strong mathematical foundation. Unlike a lot of technologies that have been used, cryptography has some sort of formal foundation on mathematical proofs. As we discussed in the previous conversation, this isn't necessarily the strongest historical thing that we can have, but if you talk about factoring numbers, this is something that people in the public don't necessarily know how to do. So cryptography could be one of these things that can really solve a certain problem in your business and really, make your problems go away. But as everything in IT and IT security, it really is more of a balance between pros and cons. Cryptography is not a silver bullet. It's a tool in the arsenal. And when you use cryptography and cryptographic protocols and cryptographic concepts to help secure your business or help to give you different things that help improve security, it's not necessarily going to give you everything in a sort of perfect sense. It'll have upsides, it'll have downsides, and that's what I'm going to speak about today in this first talk, is what are some of the pros and cons of cryptography, and what are the advantages that you get, and what are some of the disadvantages of some of the more commonly used examples of cryptography in business. So does anybody have their laptop out right now? I can see. So there's a site that Troy Hunt runs called haveibeenOwned.com. And if anyone's brave enough, I know this is an IT security conference, to type their one of their commonly known email addresses in there, so a personal one or whatnot. Let's raise the audience. Is anybody willing to do this right now on their phone or anything like that? Okay, well, no, apparently not. But a lot of people don't have their laptops out. But you'll find that potentially you have been compromised by one of these very large, massive data breaches over the last couple years that have come out. And on the site, they list sort of the top 10 breaches in terms of number of accounts. When they consider breaches in this case, they mean an email address associated with a piece of data that validates a password. And as you can see, these are hundreds of thousands of accounts in very, very popular and well-used services, from depending on, I guess, your generation, MySpace to Tumblr, to as well business accounts, Dropbox, depending on where you're from and what was popular, VK, these sort of things. So I'm going to go a little bit into two of these such breaches, which have similar timelines, and to try to understand how cryptography played a role and how using cryptography correctly versus missing out a small piece can really change your security stance. And these are the logos. Back in 2012, people were into adding a little bit more color. Things are flat now in terms of design. But in 2012, there was a breach in both Dropbox and LinkedIn. And these were very massive breaches of email addresses. And they also came with password hashes. So this is the first cryptographic basic construct that we'll get into on this talk, which a hash function is really like a trash compactor. You take one password or value, and then you just crunch it into a digest, and you can store that digest. And it's a one-way function, so you can't take a car, or you can't take a cube of metal and turn it into a car, at least not easily. It takes a lot of work. And one of the most common algorithms for doing this is SHA-1. So if you just consider this as your basic cryptographic construct, you take your password and you hash it. This has been well known in security space for a while, that it's not necessarily the most secure thing you can do. Just take a hash of a password and store this. But unfortunately, this is what both Dropbox and LinkedIn did in 2012, which is pretty late, I guess, historically, to be doing such a thing. But the problem comes when an attacker knows that SHA-1 is the transformation that was applied. So what you can do is offline develop something called a rainbow table, in which you take all the potential passwords that are most common, and you can go all the way through the combinations that you want and hash them with SHA-1, and then you get a series of hashes. And then if this essentially allows you to reverse the hash function. If you just have a hash function, you can look up what originally got transformed into it. So this rainbow table lets you break all sorts of hashes for all sorts of passwords, and lets it apply everywhere. So when a password dump comes out, it's like you have an entire set of these crushed cars, and if you know that they use SHA-1, you can just go backwards in the rainbow table and discover what the password originally was. And this is what happened with both LinkedIn and Dropbox. People got email addresses and SHA-1 hashes of passwords, and people have been running this on hardware from... The interesting part is SHA-1 has become so fast because of its involvement in Bitcoin that no longer do you run it on your laptop or on a GPU or on an FPGA. They've built custom ASIC hardware to do SHA-1. So SHA-1 is incredibly fast, and there are rainbow tables that cover passwords up to the complexity beyond those that a lot of password policies require. So if you find a dump, you can just go into this rainbow table and go back and solve it. So over 90% of the passwords were recovered, even though they were using correct or using cryptography in one form or the other. What both these companies migrated to, and what the sort of expected best practice is a keyed hash function. So with a keyed hash function, you take your password and you take, for every password, a different salt. So you take a different value, take it with your password, and combine it together. And what really this does is more of an immunity to rainbow tables. If someone is doing an attack that is focused on everybody, they are not able to guess run a password and salt. These salts can be pretty long, so you can't really build an entire rainbow table for every password anymore. You have to run a rainbow table for every individual account. You have to do one for every salt. So that really raises the bar on the types of attacks that someone can do. And what was found in this attack, for these companies, was that this was happening in the middle of a migration from a less secure sort of single hash to a keyed hash function. And this is very difficult to resolve, to do this sort of migration, because if you have a hash, by definition you don't have the original password of all your clients. So it's not like you can go back to the original password and then use a better algorithm to hash it. You kind of have to wait for everybody to come in and type their password. Or, as what happened, you can force everybody to reset their password so they can use the more modern algorithm. So this is one example of how using cryptography in a sort of incorrect way, really, or not an incorrect way, but a less than optimal way can hold you back from really implementing the next layer of solutions. So rainbow tables have all these sort of things. So I encourage you, I trust Troy Hunt of all people to put my email address into his website, but I encourage you to try and see whether or not you've been breached or not. So keyed hash, this is a very simple form of symmetric cryptography. And I alluded to, in the 70s, there was mathematical breakthroughs that made cryptography stronger, and this is the idea of public key cryptography. And one of the key concepts that was developed in the original papers by RSA and Diffie-Hellman were this idea of digital signature, where conceptually you can think of it as you can make a seal on a certain piece of information to prove that you have seen it or approved it of some sort. And you have a key pair, which is, one is a private key, you keep this secret. In the case of this analogy, this private key is your stamp. You have this sort of royal seal that you keep locked up. Your public key is the logo that's embedded on that stamp, and the signature is a seal itself. So if you have a letter, you can take some wax and seal it with your logo. And in this analogy, you can assume that no one can take that logo and create a stamp out of it. But essentially, this is what digital signatures are. And these are used widely to help support security. One example of this is that came into wide use not too long ago, is the idea of email authenticity. This is, which was DKIM is the standard that was suggested, which is domain keys identified mail. And the idea here is when you send a piece of mail, your email infrastructure will give it a digital signature. And you can advertise the public key for this digital signature in the domain name system. So this is some email that I could have sent, and if someone, say, tries to spoof an email from me, which is very common in email, and one of the main reasons DKIM came about was to combat spam, so that if you have advertised a policy from your email domain, there's another protocol called DMARC that allows you to spell out what the policy is. You can say every email coming from this domain should have a signature on it with one of these DKIM public keys. And if somebody sends an email that seems to be from your email address but is not signed or has an incorrect signature, such as they changed the word to add €1,000,000, then this signature will not verify. And this is a really interesting, powerful thing, and it's come into play in the news as well. So I would recommend, if you're running an email server, this is a really great way to prevent spam and to prevent spoofing. And spoofing is a way that phishing comes about in a lot of ways. This is an example. This happened not too long ago. WikiLeaks, right? WikiLeaks had recently dumped a lot of emails, and some of the people whose emails were dumped claimed that this was not the email, or this was a doctored email. But going through the emails, you can see that there are valid DKIM signatures. So as long as the DKIM private key is not hacked, which in this case it most likely wasn't, you can make sure that someone who does a data breach on you and wants to create false impressions of what your emails were, or put misleading emails into a data dump from you, they can't do that because they can't take this email and add a valid signature. And it's really a way to authenticate your corpus of corporate emails if you're using something like this, and somehow it gets leaked. So this is really a powerful tool, but as with everything else, email is part of a broader ecosystem of tools, and when in April 2014, Yahoo introduced DKIM and a strict DMARC policy, it turned out that this broke almost every mailing list that was used on the internet, including the one from the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is what they use to decide on standards. And the reason for this is there was a program called Mailman, which is a mail forwarding agent for these mailing lists, and they would actually modify the message and in an intended way. But because the messages would come through, have this DKIM signature, and it would no longer match, everything that people would send from yahoo.com or now facebook.com, microsoft.com, amazon.com, all of these companies, they don't use those email addresses for IETF mailing lists because the DKIM signature doesn't match, and it gets put in the spam folder. So this is an example of how you have this really strong technology that uses cryptography to help prevent spam from coming from your site, prevent phishing from coming from your emails, but will have some interesting side effects when it interacts with the way people have been doing things on the internet for a while. Now, this is not the only use of digital signatures. Another use that has been proposed for a number of years, but is starting to reach some serious adoption levels is something called DNSSEC. So around the same time as DKIM signatures came out, in Turkey there was an incident in which the government was hijacked the DNS. DNS is, of course, the lookup table that the phone book of the internet. It allows you to take domain names and translate them into IP addresses that you can use to look up where the location of the domain is. And these were being manipulated and blocked by the government, and so people went out and actually graffitied Google's DNS addresses in there, so people could go and actually access the internet again. This only worked for a couple days, but it was quite a crisis. People couldn't access the internet because DNS was being blocked. And what DNS purports to do is to add an authenticity layer to DNSSEC adds an authenticity layer to DNS. So if someone were to hijack DNS or to change things using something like Kaminski's attack, this is intended to solve this type of thing. So as a reminder, or if people haven't seen this before, the way Kaminski's attack works is your DNS resolver will ask for an answer, what's the address of cloudflare.com, and the server will try to answer. And if your malicious party can answer before the server, then it can trick your DNS resolver into thinking that this address is somewhere else. So these evil babies on the bottom are answering 6.6.6.6. And because there's no authenticity baked into DNS by default, this just works, and you end up you can hijack DNS. Alternatively, in a more simple way, if the attacker is on path between the two, they can just modify the message as it goes through. With DNSSEC, there's a new record that's a signature, and if the attackers, they don't know how to forge that signature because they don't have the private key, suddenly the resolver can know what is hijacked and what's not. So again, an example of a cryptographic concept that does help in difficult situations, and it does provide an extra layer of trust for the internet. But there are unexpected downsides. This is a diagram of a DNS amplification attack. So in DNS, with DNSSEC, the answers are a lot larger than the questions because IP addresses are small and digital signatures are large because they use public key cryptography, which can be up to 2,000 bits or so of data. And if you're able to send spoofed requests, or if this is a diagram where an attacker has a small botnet of 10 machines, and they can send spoof requests to these DNS servers for, say, DNSSEC signed records. Oftentimes, It's very large domains that have lots of DNSSEC signed records. They can take what could be a very small denial of service attack or a small pipeline and turn it into a very massive attack. So 500 gigabits per second. This is almost half the size of the largest denial of service that we've seen, and this can come from one attacker with access to something as small as 10 compromised machines. So as much as DNSSEC hopes to help, you can also consider that in some cases it can do harm. So there are always secondary consequences to cryptography. And the most famous form of cryptographic construct is of course encryption. It's taking data and scrambling it with a key so that only the intended recipient can decrypt it. And this is what's described here as public-private encryption, but there's also symmetric encryption, and this is something that's been used for secure communications for basically since the Romans. And you can kind of think, this is a stream cipher, for example. You can take your plain text and you have a message. If you want a perfectly secure encryption, this is the one-time pad that Wolf was talking about. You can have sort of an infinitely long stream of random data. You XOR it together and you get your ciphertext and send it down the line. And it can help in a lot of cases for businesses, especially if you're worried about data being lost. If you go on Craigslist or eBay or any of these sites and buy a hard drive, a lot of times the previous owner of the hard drive will not have used full disk encryption. And there have been several studies that have found that people don't do that, and there's residual data. So if you're running a business and you send your hard drive in to be repaired, or you sell older data and you haven't been using full disk encryption, then potentially this data is up for grabs for whoever wants to buy it. So if you think of full disk encryption, this is an advantage, but then the disadvantage is there's a user experience downside. If you forget that password, your data is irrecoverable. Encryption is almost better than secure wiping because there's no way to recover the data if you don't have the key. So if you're using full disk encryption, don't forget your password. But people are human and people tend to forget their passwords. And doing data recovery, this is actually a very big business. And with full disk encryption, you have a much smaller chance to actually recover your data from damaged hard drives.
That's a history for full disk encryption. There are enterprise systems which allow everything in seamless recovery. So I would say that statement is pretty bad.
Sure. Yes, but not always. I mean, there are advanced solutions that have integrated full disk encryption, but just in general, when you're encrypting things with a password, yourself, not relying on sort of an enterprise solution, then there can be risks of having to do these sort of things. Another example is PGP. PGP is Phil Zimmerman is here at the conference. He invented PGP. This is it's often used for emails, and one of the main problems with PGP is it's hard to use. It's very difficult to actually convince people to go into the command line and type in some commands and build the web of trust that you need to have the way to encrypt stuff, email messages from one person to another. And back again in 2014, Google and Apple announced that they were going to integrate this into their Gmail and Yahoo Mail products so that this difficult part of doing the key management would go away and you could have strong encryption. But sometimes there are business requirements that sort of hold this back. And news came out over the last couple months that there were some government-mandated backdoors into the email systems at Yahoo. And this is Yan Zhu. This is a tweet that she tweeted where the executives at the company would actually slow down or didn't approve, according to this tweet, this end-to-end encryption PGP integration, while at the same time they did integrate this kind of poorly made backdoor. So if you're going to do encryption, PGP, things like this on a wide scale, this is a great thing to do for protecting customers' privacy. And if you do have E2E enabled, your email would not be something that's sniffable or that can be given up to a government. But if you're in the business of providing email, this can put you in a pretty difficult situation. The last is HTTPS. This is what people most commonly think of cryptography. They see the little lock icon in the browser when they're going to sites. This is browser to server encryption. And a lot of sites used to not be HTTPS. And other sites also had HTTPS only for the logon screen. So this tool came out called Firesheep that demonstrated that that's really not the right way to do encryption. You should encrypt the entire site or none at all. Because if you authenticate, even send your password through a secure part of the site and then get dropped down to an insecure part of the site, then you get a cookie that allows you to log in. And what Firesheep showed was that someone could steal that cookie by reading unencrypted messages and then log in as you and do sort of lots of things. And this was the inspiration for Facebook going completely HTTPS. More recently, there was the Great Cannon, which was an attack in which unencrypted HTTP messages had JavaScript injected into them that turned them into attack web pages. So if you were to reach a certain website, which was hosted by Baidu, which was kind of like a little button that was over HTTP, not encrypted, and it went through a certain firewall, this additional code was added to the page. And any page that is HTTP can have this happen anywhere in the network. ISPs have been known to do this to inject advertisements unknowingly into websites. So HTTPS is very important. And this is a grayscale picture, but we're over 50% in a lot of places in terms of how much traffic is HTTPS. And more so than that, Chrome and other browsers are going to start punishing websites that use HTTP by changing the iconography or the security indicators in the browser. So HTTPS is something that has a lot of benefits for security, and it also from the business side. But it also encourages alternative business models to come up. Superfish was something that was installed on Lenovo laptops by a company called Commodia, and it acted as a man in the middle on your laptop. It installed a locally trusted root and was able to intercept all of your HTTPS traffic, and it was found that it actually did a very bad job of protecting your traffic on the internet going forward. So doing HTTPS for more sites kind of inspired people to do this so they can continue their business practices of injecting ads, and made the entirety of the internet weaker. Also in HTTPS, there's a lot of things you do lose. DLP is something that we've talked about a lot, and how do you do DLP if you don't have access to the encrypted traffic? ISP caching is another thing that you lose. One of the great things about the internet is that you have it's this distributed system, and if everything was over clear text HTTP, then closer to the edge of where people live, you could cache static content and sort of save bandwidth for the core of the internet. Antiviruses as well. Antivirus often has to introspect inside of your traffic to see what sort of in and out things can happen. So if you have a virus on your computer and it's communicating over HTTPS, oftentimes antivirus can't see that if it's encrypted. So HTTPS is one of the sort of prime battlefields of encryption providing security to people, but also potentially removing avenues for you to keep your system secure from malware and other pieces. And that's basically the end. Cryptography is great, but it's not a perfect silver bullet.